You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. Hello and welcome to the Force 13 garden once again. It feels like an enormous amount of time and life has gone on between, say, 2 years ago when we first properly did these videos out in the garden on our predictions ahead of hurricane season. And here we are once again in 2022 to discuss what's likely around the Northern Hemisphere basins this year. In the background you can hear our nice water fountain, which is over there, and you'll also probably hear quite a bit of wind going on, as is the weather today. Hopefully you can hear me just fine. Obviously a lot to discuss about the upcoming season, and we've been working very hard behind the scenes to gather all the data together and give ourselves the best possible idea of what we're going to be expecting over the next 6 to around 9 months till the end of the year. Before we do that though, I just want to point out that Force 13, ahead of the upcoming hurricane season, we are on a contributor drive, 101 days long, takes us through to July 29th. I think we're on day, 4 now? Maybe day 5, can't even remember, the days are just blending into one. If you think you might have what it takes to be part of our team, either working behind the scenes or on camera or on our stream, so anywhere that you can see us doing things, then please feel free to send us a message. contact@force13.com is our email address, and you can contact us through our various mediums. And just before we do get on to the predictions, I must also announce that Ticos is returning to Force 13 after it was away for around half a year. So those who weren't there in the late season last year might have missed that bit of news, but it is back and upgraded and better than ever, and it now has 2 extra parameters to focus on rainfall. So we had our first rain-related code blue a few days ago, and we are indeed code blue as of the time of broadcasting for this system near Mozambique. So that will appear quite clearly in our storm updates and our coverage throughout this year. Okay then, now it's time to get my phone notes out and reveal to you what we're expecting for this year and why. So obviously there's a lot of buzz around what might be coming up this year in 2022. Could it be another extremely strong year for the Atlantic? And it looks like we're having a triple dip La Nina now, which could make things a bit more complicated. But as it is right now, these are our predictions for the Atlantic. Got no special floor covering today. That's going to be our May update. But right now on the screen behind me you will see it. So in the Atlantic this year we are now expecting, and this includes subtropical storms unlike previous years, we are expecting 22 named storms for this year in the Atlantic, 8 hurricanes and 5 major hurricanes. A very high prediction, the highest that we have gone with in our years of broadcasting our predictions. I think we started in 2019 or maybe in 2018, can't remember now. But this is the Atlantic this year. Our key messages and our expected or likely significant tracks in 2022 on our screen there. We are showing latest trends indicating conditions particularly favourable for hurricanes developing near the Leeward Islands in early to mid-season, with a very high chance of impacts for the Greater Antilles, particularly along the northern coastlines, southern Florida, the Florida Panhandle, and possibly maybe slightly further west of there as well, extending into maybe Alabama and Mississippi. Later season trends are strongly favouring activity in the Caribbean, particularly around the Greater Antilles once again, with western Cuba and the Yucatan at greatest threat. If we do get a Yucatan storm this year, it will probably be a little bit away from the rest of the activity actually from our current trends, but we might have maybe a couple of significant storms around that area into the Bay of Campeche. At the moment it does appear as though the Gulf of Mexico, the Western Gulf, might get off with it a little bit, but we'll find out in a moment. 2 channels of activity are likely this year, with many storms and some stronger hurricanes expected to divert out to sea, quite normal. And the other channel existing, as we said, through the Greater Antilles and through western Florida. You can sort of make that out when you look at our track predictions there. So, current trends are suggesting that activity may be significantly limited in the western Gulf of Mexico, although historic trends somewhat disagree and cannot be ignored. For instance, when we take a look at our past landfalls on our analog seasons, although I must say there aren't any particularly good analogs this year, so this could go out of the window. But that is our best guess for past analogs, and you can see all those patterns of landfalls, quite a few different areas involved there, but you can see a few hotspots. I don't have it on my screen here, but as far as I can recall, there were quite a few hotspots around the western coast of Mexico, Texas, Florida obviously, and North Carolina. So that's the historical precedent for what we're looking at, but of course that isn't the whole story when we look at this year. Now, in terms of timing of what's happening, we are expecting most of the activity to be around peak season, particularly the anomalously busy times. As you can see on our colour coding there, the oranges are more out of the ordinary in terms of strong anomalies, and the yellows and the whites are much closer to average. But as you can see, a well above average season is planned for the Atlantic. Well, let's look at the Eastern Pacific, and it's been up and down recently, hasn't it, in that basin in recent years, and it's going to be another quite average season this year. We're expecting 16 named storms, 8 Category 1 hurricanes, and 3 major Category 3s. And we are expecting that maybe June will be the busiest month of activity. Maybe not so much of a surprise actually, it is that big first burst that we get in the Eastern Pacific season. A few key messages then. Indications so far point to a fairly average season, although storm activity could be weighted further east, and that would obviously put storms along the western coast of Mexico, the Pacific coast. Now, early season storms could impact eastern Mexico and El Salvador further east than usual, although it can happen, particularly in early season. Watch out for that, with a strong early hurricane likely out to sea. Again, not too difficult to predict, but it does appear that could happen, and maybe even a very strong hurricane. The strongest storms during mid-season are expected to remain out at sea, but again, the western coast of Mexico may still receive a substantial impact. In the late season, activity is expected to dwindle quite sharply through the month of October, and the chance of significant impacts will drop dramatically. Now, the Central Pacific, which is interesting news for some of our fan base, which seem to have a Central Pacific fascination, but I'm afraid to tell you that it's expected to remain quiet for another year, with no clear indications that even Eastern Pacific storms will survive into the Central Pacific. As you can see, the elements are angry with me on that one. However, activity east of Hawaii is possible in October. That's something to look out for, and maybe even beyond October, looking west of Hawaii, proper towards the central international dateline. And so that is our expected storm tracks. Alright, let's look. Buffeted by wind. Let's look at the Western Pacific then, and this is a particularly interesting forecast I feel. This year we are expecting 31 named storms, which is 4 above average, 17 typhoons, and 10 major typhoons of Category 3 strength or higher. Interesting key messages and key points on this. Current indications suggest that 1 or more early season typhoons are likely around the Philippine region in May, and indeed already coming up on the long-term model forecast we're looking at some significant typhoons possible, at least when you look at the GFS. We know how wrong they can be sometimes, but it would appear that the trend is towards some significant activity in May, and indeed at the end of April even. And then in June and July we're expected to be near average with predominantly weaker storms. I wouldn't bet on seeing a strong typhoon. Of course they can happen, but I don't think we're going to see anything too out of the box. And then a substantial long tracking typhoon with severe impacts cannot be ruled out in August. We're not sure yet, but one of the indications was showing a long tracking intense typhoon possibly ploughing northwestwards through northern Taiwan into China. Currently it appears as though late season activity though could be well above average, possibly reaching historic levels from October through December. Now by this time, storm recurvatures look like they're going to become less likely, and the Philippines, Vietnam, Hong Kong, Taiwan and Japan, all of these places are all at risk of severe impacts with a much higher normal probability than normal. So that is something to look at towards the late season. So far there have been no indications of storms tracking particularly far north, so we're not particularly concerned about the Korean Peninsula, at least not above normal levels, and we haven't found anything clear-cut for any storm impacts there. But of course we know that anything can happen in these seasons. Now you'll see the colours on the screen there, and showing some really dark orange in October, and that is where we expect a real anomalous activity to happen with some possibly very strong typhoon, extending on into November as well. And here's a track mock-up that we had for a worst case scenario, showing just where all of those tracks are going. The colours correspond to each different month, they get redder as the season goes on, and you can see there the tracks, the general spread really favouring just off the coast of the Philippines and over the land as well. And South China Sea could be quite a busy season there actually, when you look at it, with some strong typhoon impacts possible, especially places like Hong Kong and central Vietnam and Taiwan, and even the western part of the Philippines, maybe a little bit higher than average on the chances this year. And finally, looking at the North Indian Ocean, there's obviously less to tell here because there's hardly only a fraction of the storms formed here, but what we found so far is that we're expecting a traditional seasonal pattern in the region, with those two peaks, the first one happening in May and probably a bigger one happening in October. And we're expecting with the May storms maybe a substantial cyclone affecting the eastern Bay of Bengal, so it could be Myanmar, maybe the Ganges River Delta, possibly for a May impact with a significant tropical cyclone. So far it's showing that the whole basin will be well above average in terms of rainfall and well below average in terms of general atmospheric pressure, so it looks like cyclone activity could be substantial. We're also looking at maybe a weaker storm impact for the central to southern part of India. Now in October, it's sort of matching up with the Western Pacific, and usually with these really busy events, busy phases in different parts of the world, it spreads from west to east. So first it would be the Indian Ocean before it gets to the Western Pacific. So earlier in the month, in October, and maybe throughout the month actually, we could be seeing some significant tropical cyclones with impacts. Let's see here, major cyclone impacts possible for Andhra Pradesh and Odisha, and possibly into West Bengal. That's the areas that we're looking at for potential big impacts there. We are expecting 5 tropical cyclones in the northern Indian Basin this year. Now let's look on our graphics at the chances of seeing particularly bad conditions when all things have been considered. Looking at the United States, this is for tropical storm force winds. We've made it relative rather than percentages this time around because I don't feel that the percentages are particularly helpful. So we have relative chances here, and you can see the very high chances, curiously, only on the western half of Florida more than the eastern half, because it's looking like at the moment that the eastern coast from central Florida northwards to North Carolina, chances are a little bit lower than usual there for this year. This is for tropical storm conditions, of course, chances are still quite significant. High chances, but not very high chances in Texas and Louisiana, western Louisiana, because there's uncertainty particularly in that area, big uncertainty on the western Gulf this year. North Carolina, it looks like something will happen there this year when we're looking at tropical storm impacts and possibly more. And the US East Coast, whilst it doesn't look like there's going to be a direct impact from a storm ploughing right up from the sea, it does look like there could be one or more substantial threats from storms that have already made landfall and are then moving on to the New England area. So that's something to watch out for this season, particularly in around September, October. I don't think there's anything else of real note on that US graphic. Looking at the hurricane chances, you know, that's pretty clear as well, and you can clearly make out the less certainty in the Texas region. But certainly for Florida, Louisiana, and the Gulf Coast, really, in between those two places, and a little part of North Carolina, we're looking at very high chances. Looking at the basin as a whole for tropical storm conditions, you'll see there the Greater Antilles in particular, the very high chance of tropical storm conditions. A little bit less further south, it's going to really favour the northern area of the Greater Antilles, and indeed the northern part of the Caribbean. It doesn't look like we're going to get significant southern tracking Caribbean storms, although we can't rule out maybe one in the far south that might affect Nicaragua. I don't think there's much else to say on that, although maybe it's worth saying actually that the eastern Atlantic maybe chances a little bit down there compared to recent years. Places like the Azores, Cape Verde, and maybe Bermuda. And looking at hurricane risks, I think it's quite average actually for this year. Maybe it's just the coast of Mexico that's maybe slightly below average, and actually the eastern towards the Leeward Islands, although hurricanes might form in that area, they might not be particularly strong at that point, and so we're not fully sure about hurricane chances in that area compared to average. Now let's look, I should also point out that Mexico is shown on those graphics as well. Pretty normal, higher chances than usual though along the coast around Colima, Coacan, and maybe even for areas like, I think we're looking up towards Nayarit, also for significant tropical storm and possibly hurricane impacts from recurvatures this year. Now let's look at the Western Pacific then, showing you there just how busy it's looking for tropical storm conditions. I mean, yeah, this is pretty normal. The Philippines averages one typhoon a year, so it's actually a surprise when there isn't a typhoon impact there. But once again, very high chances of tropical storm and typhoon conditions extending up through Taiwan, through the southern coast of Japan. Could be significant impacts there along the southern coast directly, but moving inland, maybe not so much. The Korean Peninsula, yeah, around average, and looking for typhoon conditions. Let me try and find that. Yeah, obviously the Philippines, very high chances right up the east coast. A little less on the west coast actually, although they have more chance of tropical storm conditions. And central Vietnam, an area that we're watching. Northern Vietnam, a little bit less for typhoons, maybe more for tropical storms. Could still be very wet. Rainfall above average, particularly towards the end of the year. These areas that we could be looking for flooding concerns on land masses all around the South China Sea. And I think that just about covers it for this current prediction. Our next prediction, of course, we're delayed in this one actually by about 2 weeks due to other commitments. But at the end of May 31st, during our countdown to Atlantic hurricane season live, we will have another prediction here under the lights at night, live, and we'll see if there's any updates when we get there. And just to give you an idea of TCOS, we've been doing a backdating project on TCOS actually, and there's a little map, a chart here, showing all of the years going from top to bottom, and then all of the months and days going from left to right. And you can quite clearly see where the trends are for busy periods. Those who are unfamiliar with TCOS and think it's just gobbledygook, well, the blue areas, obviously it goes from severity, from unclassified, which is black here, to blue, code blue, yellow, orange and red. Basically, if it's red, that means we're live streaming all the time. It's a serious, big situation. If it's orange, we're here. It's the next level of preparedness. We expect to do several hours of live streaming per day if it's an orange. If it's yellow, we might do a live stream here and there, lots of storm updates. And if it's a blue, we're generally just looking out for it, maybe doing some storm updates and landfall coverage just for the hour that it makes landfall. Sometimes, depends really. We're trying to make the definitions clearer by the time we get to our May 31st update, so that people can get back used to TCOS once again. If you have any more questions in general around Force 13 and what we do, and possibly to join in on our contributor drive, please feel free to send us a message, contact@force13.com, or you can also send us messages on social media at Force13 on Twitter, and you can search Force13 on Facebook, and join our Discord server with our big community of over 3,800 storm trackers right now, all around the world, covering all weather topics. You can find it at discord.gg/Force13. From here it's actually turned out quite nice. It's quite warm, so I think I'll be relaxing somewhere in the back over there, and it's been nice to reveal our predictions, and hopefully we do a good job of them this year. It can be hit and miss sometimes. The art of prediction can be quite difficult, but I think there is some amount of confidence. A lot of research has gone into this year's predictions, more than in any other year, so I'm feeling pretty confident about what we've got up the grounds, and hopefully let's stay safe and stay aware with all of the tropical activities, and we'll be covering it live and recorded, and we're getting blasted right now with this wind gust. We'll see you again soon.